Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly toward a walled city where the air already tastes faintly of wood smoke and damp earth, where stone towers rise out of the early mist, and where the sound of a distant bell carries farther than you expect. You find yourself on a worn road, the ground firm beneath your boots, the sky just beginning to lighten, with a pale grey glow that hints at morning, but does not quite commit to it. Somewhere ahead, York waits, still half asleep, still guarded, still breathing slowly under its blanket of smoke and silence. And just to gently ground you in reality, you probably would not survive this for long without a strong stomach, a bit of luck, and a willingness to ignore certain smells that modern life has kindly erased. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to share where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. It is always comforting to know who else is wandering through history at this quiet hour. Now dim the lights. You take another step forward and the shape of the city wall becomes clearer. It rises ahead of you, not impossibly tall, but solid, dependable, built from stone that has seen generations pass beneath it. The surface is uneven in places, weathered by rain and wind, softened at the edges where time has quietly worked its patience. You can almost feel the weight of years in it, as if each block carries a memory of footsteps, voices, and long-forgotten days. A widely accepted historical detail is that York was one of the most important cities in medieval England, protected by extensive walls that were both defensive and symbolic. They were not simply barriers. They told you where the city began, where authority held, where rules applied. As you draw closer, you notice movement along the top. A watchman walks slowly along the wall, his pace unhurried but deliberate. His cloak hangs heavy around his shoulders, catching the faint breeze. He does not look down at you right away. Instead, he scans the horizon as if the world beyond the city still demands his attention even at this quiet hour. You pause for a moment, listening. There is a softness to the morning that feels almost complete. No loud carts yet, no crowds, just the distant murmur of something waking, a faint crackle perhaps from a hearth being stirred back to life, a low voice carried on the air, too far away to understand, and then from somewhere inside the walls, a bell. It rings once, then again, not hurried, not urgent, just present. The sound travels outward, rolling gently across the fields, touching you where you stand. You feel it more than hear it, a subtle vibration that seems to settle into your chest. It is not a call you must obey, not yet, but it reminds you that time here is not yours alone. It belongs to the city, to its rhythms, to its expectations. Scholars continue to debate whether medieval people experienced time as strictly as we do now, or if these bells served more as a loose guide than an exact command. As you stand there, it feels somewhere in between. The bell does not rush you, but it does not let you forget it exists. You move again, approaching the gate. It is set into the wall, like a pause in the stone, framed by thicker masonry and flanked by towers that feel slightly more imposing than the rest. The wooden doors are open but not wide, enough to allow passage, not enough to forget their purpose. Iron bands reinforce the timber, dark against the grain, and you can see the marks of use where hands and weather have worn the surface smooth. Near the entrance, another figure stands. This one notices you. The guard shifts his weight, not aggressively, but with awareness. His gaze moves over you in a practiced way, taking in your clothing, your pace, your expression. You are not the first traveller to arrive at dawn, and you will not be the last. Still, each arrival matters. You nod slightly, a quiet acknowledgement, and continue forward. He does not stop you. That in itself feels like permission. As you pass beneath the gate, the light changes. Outside, the sky had begun to open. Here, the stone above you briefly closes it off, creating a moment of dimness that feels almost like stepping underwater. The air cools, the sound softens, and your footsteps echo faintly against the enclosed space. Then you emerge on the other side, and York begins. The first thing you notice is the smell. It is not overwhelming, not yet, but it is layered. Wood smoke, yes, drifting from early fires. Damp earth, still holding the memory of night. Something faintly sour. Something organic. Something that reminds you that this is a living place, not a curated one. You breathe it in, carefully adjusting, letting your senses catch up. A curious and lesser known detail is that many medieval cities, including York, had strict regulations about when waste could be disposed of, yet enforcement was uneven at best. What you smell now is not chaos, but it is not cleanliness either. It is life unfiltered. The street ahead is narrow, though not claustrophobic. Buildings line both sides, their upper stories leaning slightly inward, as if they are quietly observing one another across the space. Timber frames show through pale plaster dark beams, creating patterns that feel both irregular and intentional. A shutter opens somewhere above. You hear it before you see it, a soft wooden creak followed by a pause. Then a hand appears, pushing it outward. A face follows, briefly visible, glancing down at the street, with the casual curiosity of someone beginning their day. You keep walking. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, not quite mud, not quite solid. It holds the memory of countless steps worn into subtle dips and rises. You adjust your pace instinctively, finding a rhythm that keeps you steady without needing to think too much about it. Another bell rings closer this time, then another from a different direction. They do not clash, not exactly, but they overlap in a way that creates a soft, shifting pattern of sound. You realise slowly that this city is not defined by silence, even at its quietest. There is always something, a note, a movement, a presence. You pass a doorway where a faint glow spills onto the street. Inside, someone is already at work. You do not see them clearly, only the suggestion of movement, the shadow of hands, the outline of a figure bending over something low and steady. The smell of baking drifts outward, warm and almost comforting, cutting through the cooler air. You pause again just for a breath. This feels familiar in a way that is hard to explain. Not because you have been here before, but because the pattern of waking, of beginning, of quiet preparation, before the day fully arrives, is something that crosses centuries without much change. Historians still argue whether early risers in medieval cities did so out of necessity or habit shaped by limited artificial light. As you stand there, it seems like both. The city wakes because it must, but also because it always has. You continue forward deeper now. Behind you, the gate remains open, but it already feels distant. Ahead, the street curves, slightly disappearing from view in a way that invites you to follow without revealing too much. The buildings grow closer together, the sounds slightly more frequent, the air a little warmer. York is no longer something you approach, it is something you are inside. And as the bells continue their quiet conversation above you, you begin to understand that this place will not rush to explain itself. It will unfold slowly, one step, one sound, one breath at a time. You take another step. You follow the curve of the street, letting it guide you deeper into the city without needing to decide anything at all. The light has shifted slightly since you passed through the gate. It is still early, still gentle, but it now filters between buildings in narrow strips, catching edges of timber and glancing off small panes of uneven glass. The effect feels soft and fractured, like the morning is being revealed piece by piece rather than all at once. The houses press closer here. Their upper floors lean out just enough that if you reached up you might almost brush the wood with your fingertips. The beams are dark, some nearly black with age, while the plaster between them shows subtle variations in colour, cream grey, faint ochre, depending on how it has weathered. You notice small imperfections everywhere, a slight bulge where a wall has settled, a crooked line where something has been repaired. Nothing feels perfectly straight, yet nothing feels unstable either. It simply holds. A well-established historical understanding tells us that many medieval houses were built using timber framing techniques, with materials sourced locally and shaped by hand rather than standardized tools. As you walk, you can almost sense that individuality. Each building seems to have its own quiet character, its own way of standing in the street. A door opens suddenly to your left. You turn just slightly, not startled but aware. A woman steps out carrying a wooden bucket. She pauses for a moment, adjusting her grip, then glances down the street as if measuring the day ahead. Her clothing is simple but practical layers of fabric that move with her rather than restrict her. She notices you only briefly, her gaze passing over you with the calm indifference reserved for strangers who do not immediately demand attention. Then she moves on. You hear the faint slosh of water inside the bucket as she walks, the sound rhythmic, almost soothing. It blends with other early sounds now beginning to gather. A shutter closing somewhere above. The soft scrape of something being dragged across the floor. A quiet cough followed by a voice answering it. You keep walking. The street narrows a little more, then widens again just enough to let a small cart pass. The ground here shows deeper grooves, evidence of wheels that have pressed into it over time. You imagine how it must feel later in the day when those carts are more frequent, when the space becomes something to negotiate rather than drift through. For now, it remains gentle. A faint warmth touches your face as you pass another doorway. This one is open wider, and you can see inside more clearly. A low fire burns in a hearth, its glow steady rather than bright. A figure bends over it, adjusting something with slow, practiced movements. The smell that reaches you is unmistakable now. Bread. Fresh, simple, and deeply inviting. A curious detail often overlooked is that bread formed the foundation of most people's diet in medieval cities, with different qualities and grains reflecting social status. The loaf being prepared here will likely be coarse-filling and entirely necessary. You linger for just a moment longer than you intended. The warmth draws you in not enough to step inside, but enough to notice the contrast between that interior space and the street. Inside, everything seems contained, focused. Outside, the world is still assembling itself, still deciding what shape the day will take. You move on again. A voice calls out behind you, not to you, but to someone else. It carries easily in the narrow space, bouncing lightly between the walls. You do not catch the words, but you recognize the tone. Familiarity, routine, perhaps even mild impatience. It feels like a conversation that has happened many times before and will happen many times again. Above you, a line stretches from one building to another, Fabric hangs from it, still damp, catching the morning air. A sleeve shifts slightly in the breeze, brushing against another piece of cloth with a soft whispering sound. It is a small detail, but it adds to the sense that life here is not hidden away. It spills outward into shared space, into view. Historians continue to discuss whether medieval urban living felt crowded or communal to those who experienced it. As you walk beneath these leaning structures, it seems like a bit of both. There is little distance between people here, little privacy in the modern sense, yet there is also a kind of quiet acceptance, an understanding that this closeness is simply how life works. You step carefully over a patch of uneven ground where the surface dips slightly. A thin trickle of water runs along one edge of the street, following a shallow channel that guides it away. It reflects the light in small, shifting patterns, turning something ordinary into something almost delicate. Another person passes you, moving in the opposite direction. He walks with purpose, his pace quicker than yours, though not rushed. He carries a bundle under one arm, wrapped tightly in cloth. As he passes, you catch a faint scent of wool, and something sharper, perhaps dye or oil. He nods once, briefly, then continues on without breaking stride. You find yourself matching your pace to the rhythm of the street. Not too slow, not too fast, just enough to belong. From somewhere ahead comes a new sound, a dull, steady tapping. It repeats at regular intervals, not loud but persistent. As you move closer, it becomes clearer. Wood against wood, or perhaps metal against something softer. The kind of sound that marks the beginning of work, the quiet announcement that the day is no longer waiting. A quirky little tidbit is that many trades in medieval cities relied heavily on sound as a signal, from the tapping of craftsmen to the calls of vendors, creating a kind of informal soundscape that helped people navigate daily life. You're beginning to hear that now, the city layering its voices one by one. You turn slightly into a side lane. It is narrower than the street you were on, the walls closer, the light thinner. The air feels different here, more enclosed, carrying scents more strongly. You detect leather, faint but distinct, along with the ever-present smoke that seems to drift through every part of the city. A doorway stands open halfway down the lane. Inside, shapes move, shadows crossing the threshold as someone works just out of clear view. You hear the soft creak of something being pulled tight, followed by a pause, then the sound again. You do not stop this time. Instead, you let the lane carry you through, emerging again into a slightly wider space, where the light opens up just a little. The sky above is now brighter, though still pale, and you can see a hint of blue beginning to press through the grey. Another bell rings, closer now, clearer. It does not startle you anymore. Instead, it feels like a marker, a gentle reminder that the city has fully begun its day, even if it still moves at a measured pace. You slow for a moment, letting yourself take it in. The leaning houses, the soft sounds, the layered smells, the sense of something old and steady unfolding around you without urgency. You are no longer an outsider standing at the edge. You are part of the movement now, carried forward by the quiet momentum of York as it wakes. And as you take another step, the street ahead begins to open into something busier, something louder, something that promises more voices, more motion, more life, just waiting to gather. The street widens gradually, almost without you noticing at first. The buildings still lean inward, but the space between them allows more light to settle, and with it comes a clearer sense of the sky above. Pale blue now stretches where grey had lingered, and the air feels a touch lighter, as if the city itself has taken a slow breath. Another bell rings. This one is closer than before, fuller in tone, and it lingers just a little longer in the air. You pause without thinking, your attention drawn upward. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, a tower rises unseen, but clearly present in the sound it sends out across the streets. Then another bell answers. From a different direction, a slightly higher pitch, not synchronized, but not chaotic either. They seem to acknowledge one another, overlapping briefly before fading. You begin to notice how often they sound. Not constantly, but regularly enough that they form a kind of pattern beneath everything else. A rhythm that does not demand your attention, yet shapes it all the same. You take a few steps, and there it is again. A distant chime, softer this time, as if it belongs to a smaller church tucked somewhere between the larger structures. A widely recognised historical fact is that medieval cities like York were filled with churches, each with its own bells marking hours, services, and important moments. These bells did more than signal time. They organised life itself, guiding work, prayer, rest, and even the closing of city gates. You continue walking, and as you do, the bells seem to follow you. Or perhaps you are simply becoming more aware of them. A man steps out from a nearby doorway, pulling his cloak tighter around his shoulders. He pauses, listening just as you did. For a brief moment, the two of you share that quiet recognition. Then he nods slightly, almost to himself, and sets off down the street at a steady pace. It is as if the sound has given him direction. You wonder how often this happens, how many small decisions are shaped by these tones drifting through the air. When to begin, when to stop, when to gather, when to go home. Scholars still argue whether medieval timekeeping created a strict daily structure or allowed for more flexibility than we imagine today. As you stand here, it feels less like a rigid schedule and more like a gentle framework, something that guides without pressing too hard. A cart rattles past you, its wooden wheels rolling over the uneven ground with a soft but persistent clatter. The driver sits forward slightly, his hands steady on the reins. The horse moves at an unhurried pace, its breath visible in faint bursts, as the morning air still holds a trace of coolness. You step aside, giving them space. As they pass, you catch another scent. Hay, animal warmth, a hint of leather. It blends with the ever-present smoke, creating a mixture that feels strangely grounded, as if the city's identity is tied to these simple, practical elements. Above you, a window opens. A voice follows. You cannot make out the words, but the tone carries clearly. It is directed across the street, perhaps to a neighbour. Another voice answers softer, and for a moment the two overlap, with the distant bells, with the creak of the cart, with the faint tapping of work beginning somewhere out of sight. The city is no longer quiet, not loud, not overwhelming, but alive in a way that fills the spaces between sounds with meaning. You continue forward, drawn toward a slightly larger open area ahead. The street does not quite become a square, but it widens enough to allow a small gathering of people. A few stand in loose clusters, speaking in low voices. Others move through without stopping, their paths crossing briefly before separating again. At the edge of this space stands a smaller church. Its stone walls are lighter than the city walls you passed earlier, and its tower rises just high enough to hold a set of bells that you now realise you have been hearing. The doorway is open, and a faint glow from within suggests candles already lit. You do not enter. Instead you linger just outside watching. A woman approaches the entrance. Her steps measured, her expression calm. She pauses briefly at the threshold, then steps inside, disappearing into the dim interior. A moment later, another bell sounds from above, closer now, clearer, and you feel it resonate through the ground beneath your feet. A curious and lesser known detail is that bells were sometimes believed to have protective qualities, their sound thought to drive away storms or even unseen dangers. Whether or not people truly believe this, the idea lingers in the way the sound seems to settle over the city, as if offering a kind of quiet reassurance. You take a slow breath. The air feels different here, not cleaner exactly, but touched by something else. Perhaps it is the proximity to the church. Perhaps it is simply the way the space opens up, allowing the sounds to gather and disperse more gently. A child runs across the open area, his steps quick and light. He is followed by an older figure who calls after him, not sharply, but with enough insistence to suggest that this is a familiar pattern. The child slows, then stops, turning back with a grin that you can almost sense even from where you stand. Life continues around you, small and ordinary, yet shaped by something larger. Another bell rings, this one longer, more deliberate. You notice how people respond. Some pause. Not everyone, but enough to create a subtle shift. Conversations soften, movements slow for just a moment. Then, as the sound fades, everything resumes, but with a slightly altered rhythm, as if the bell has gently reset the pace. You begin to understand. This is not just background noise, it is a language. Not spoken, not written, but heard and felt. A way of communicating without needing words. A shared understanding that connects everyone within these walls, whether they are aware of it or not. You step away from the church, letting the space behind you close again as you return to the narrower streets. The bells continue more distant now, but still present, still threading through the air like something constant and dependable. The sun has risen a little higher. Light catches on the edges of rooftops, on the surfaces of windows, on the faint moisture that still clings to the ground. The city feels warmer, more defined, as if the outlines that were soft before are now becoming clearer. And yet the pace remains gentle. No rush, no urgency. Just the steady unfolding of a day, guided by sound, by habit, by a rhythm that has been repeated so many times, it no longer needs to be questioned. You walk on listening. You drift with the street as it opens into something busier, though not yet overwhelming. The space ahead feels more purposeful, as if the city has chosen this spot to gather its voices. The ground becomes firmer underfoot, more compacted by the passage of many feet, and the air shifts again, carrying with it new layers of scent that speak of trade, of movement, of exchange. You have reached the market. It does not announce itself with a sign or boundary, it simply emerges. A cluster of wooden stalls stands arranged in loose order, some already fully set, others still in the process of becoming. Cloths are being spread across tables. Baskets are lifted and set down. A crate is opened with a dull thud, releasing the faint smell of vegetables that still hold the memory of soil. Voices gather here more quickly than elsewhere. Not loud, not chaotic, but overlapping in a way that creates a constant shifting murmur. A man calls out a greeting. Another answers with a half laugh. Somewhere nearby, a negotiation has already begun, the tone polite but firm, each word placed carefully. You step closer. A woman arranges loaves of bread in neat rows, her hands moving with quiet efficiency. The shapes vary slightly, some round, some longer, their surfaces marked by subtle differences in colour and texture. She adjusts one loaf, then another, as if presentation carries its own importance. It does. A broadly accepted point among historians is that medieval markets were tightly regulated spaces where weights, measures and quality were monitored to maintain order and fairness. This was not a free-for-all, even if it might look that way at first glance. You notice a set of scales resting on a nearby stool. The metal glints faintly in the growing light. A small set of weights sits beside it, each one carefully shaped. A man lifts one, testing it in his hand, then sets it down again with a soft, deliberate motion. There is a seriousness here, a quiet understanding that these tools carry trust as much as function. You move slowly between the stalls, letting your pace match the environment. A basket of apples catches your attention. Their skins are not perfectly smooth. Some bear small marks, faint blemishes that speak of weather and handling. They look real in a way that feels almost unfamiliar if you think about it too long. You reach out, then pause. Not because you are not allowed, but because you sense that every action here has a place, a timing. Instead, you let your hand fall back to your side, choosing to observe rather than interrupt. A nearby voice rises slightly. Fair measure, someone insists. The words are clear, the tone calm but unyielding. You glance in that direction and see two figures standing across from one another, their attention fixed on the scales between them. One watches closely as the other adjusts the weight, making a small correction that seems to satisfy both. The moment passes. They nod and the exchange continues. An unusual but documented detail is that disputes over weights and measures could lead to public penalties, as maintaining trust in the market was essential for the city's stability. Even here, in this quiet early hour, that expectation is present. You continue on. A stall to your right displays strips of cloth in muted colours, browns, soft reds, faded greens. The fabric hangs loosely, shifting slightly with the movement of air. A hand runs across one piece, testing its texture, pressing gently, as if reading something beneath the surface. You notice how tactile everything is. Nothing is distant. Nothing is sealed away. Goods are touched, examined, weighed, considered. The senses are engaged fully, not just sight, but sound, smell, and feel. A faint scent of herbs drifts toward you. You follow it almost without thinking, drawn by something sharper, cleaner than the heavier smells that surround it. A small table holds bundles of greenery tied with simple cord. Leaves of different shapes, some narrow, some broad, each carrying its own quiet fragrance. The person behind the table speaks softly, explaining something to a customer. You do not hear the full exchange, only fragments. Words about use, about preparation, about timing. It sounds less like a sale and more like shared knowledge passed from one person to another. Experts continue to discuss how much of medieval commerce relied on personal relationships rather than strict pricing systems. As you stand here, it feels clear that familiarity matters. Trust is built not just through rules, but through repeated interactions, through recognition. A cart arrives at the edge of the market. Its wheels slow then stop with a soft final shift. The driver climbs down, stretching briefly before beginning to unload. Crates are lifted one by one, each placed carefully onto the ground. The motion is steady, unhurried, as if there is no need to rush what will happen anyway. You step aside again, allowing the flow to continue around you. The sounds deepen as more people arrive. Footsteps multiply. Voices layer. A laugh breaks through light and quick, followed by a response that carries a hint of teasing. Somewhere behind you, a dog barks, once, then falls silent, as if reminded that this is not its space to dominate. You begin to feel the rhythm of the market. It is not chaotic. It is not perfectly ordered either. It sits somewhere between, held together by habit, by expectation, by the quiet understanding that everyone here plays a role. You pause near the centre, letting the movement flow around you. The bells still sound, though more distant now, their presence woven into the background. They no longer define your attention, but they remain marking time even as the market seems to exist in its own steady moment. A figure passes close by carrying a basket filled with something covered by cloth. As they move, the edge lifts slightly, revealing a glimpse of what lies beneath. You do not see clearly, but you catch enough to know it is something fresh, something recently prepared. You do not need to know more. The city does not reveal everything at once. It offers pieces, moments, details that build slowly into understanding. And as you take another step through the gathering crowd, you realize that you are no longer just observing. You are moving with it, adjusting your pace, your attention, your senses to match the quiet complexity of life unfolding around you. You ease out of the market's gentle swirl and follow a lane that narrows again, as if the city is guiding you from shared space back into something more focused. The sounds of trade soften behind you, replaced by a steadier pattern. A repeated knock, a rasping scrape, the faint ring of metal meeting metal. Work has its own language here, and you are beginning to recognize its cadence. The street you enter feels purposeful. Doorways stand open not for display, but for access. Light spills outward in thin bands, revealing hands at work tools, laid out materials stacked in careful order. You pass one threshold and glimpse a bench covered in wood shavings, curled and pale like thin ribbons. Another doorway reveals a loom, its frame solid threads stretched in tight lines that catch the light. You slow not to stop, but to absorb. An established historical point is that medieval towns organised trades into guilds, groups that regulated training quality and competition. As you move along this lane, that structure becomes visible in small ways. Similar crafts cluster together. Skills are shared, guarded and passed on with care. A man stands just outside a workshop holding a piece of wood up to eye level. He turns it slightly, examining the grain, then runs his thumb along its edge. There is a patience in his movements that suggests this is not hurried work. It cannot be. Inside, another figure works at a bench, tools arranged within easy reach. The sound you heard earlier becomes clearer now. A steady tapping, measured and consistent, as if guided by something more than simple repetition. You continue on. The air here carries different scents. Sawdust faintly sweet. Heated metal sharper and more defined. Leather rich and slightly earthy. Each doorway offers a new variation, a subtle shift that marks the presence of a different trade. You pass a shop where metalwork is underway. The glow from within is brighter than the others, a small fire burning with focused intensity. A figure stands over it, adjusting something with a long tool, their face lit from below in flickering orange. When they strike, the sound rings out clearly, a brief sharp note that lingers in the air before fading. A lesser known detail is that apprentices often began training at a young age, learning these crafts through years of observation and practice, rather than formal schooling. You glance to the side and notice a younger figure nearby, watching closely, hands idle but eyes attentive. The exchange between them is quiet, a gesture, a nod, a correction made without words. You move forward again, drawn by another sound. This one softer, a rhythmic creak followed by a pause, then the same motion repeated. You find its source in a doorway where a loom fills much of the space. Threads stretch vertically, forming a grid that seems almost delicate, yet is held under tension. A woman sits before it, her hands moving with practiced precision, guiding the shuttle through the threads. The fabric grows slowly. You can see the pattern emerging, subtle but intentional. A line of darker thread here, a shift in texture there. It's not something that reveals itself all at once. It requires time, attention, and a steady hand. Researchers continued to explore how specialised these crafts were within cities like York, and how much variation existed between individual makers. As you watch, it feels clear that even within shared techniques, there is room for personal skill for small differences that shape the final result. You step back slightly, allowing someone to pass. They carry a bundle wrapped tightly in cloth held close to their body. As they move past you, you catch a faint scent of dye, sharp and slightly bitter. It lingers for a moment, then fades as they continue down the lane. Above, a window opens. A piece of fabric is lowered, carefully held between two hands. It hangs there briefly, catching the light, before being pulled back inside. You wonder if it is being inspected, checked for flaws that might not be visible in the dim interior. You continue walking. The lane bends slightly, revealing another cluster of workshops. Here, the sounds overlap more noticeably. Tapping, scraping, the soft murmur of voices, all blending into a steady background that feels almost calming in its consistency. You realise that this is not noise in the way you might expect. It is structured, predictable. Each sound belongs. A craftsman steps out from one of the doorways, wiping his hands on a cloth. He pauses, stretching his shoulders, then looks down the street as if measuring something unseen. For a moment his gaze meets yours. There is no surprise in it, no question, just acknowledgement. Then he turns and goes back inside. And interesting, aside from the period, is that guild members often maintained strict standards, not only for their work, but for who could practice their trade within the city. This created both stability and limitation, ensuring quality while also controlling opportunity. You sense that balance here, the pride in skill, the quiet boundaries that shape who belongs where. You pass a doorway where tools hang neatly along the wall. Each one has its place, its purpose. None seem decorative. They are used, maintained, respected. The arrangement itself feels intentional, as if the order of tools reflects the order of work. You pause briefly, then move on. The light has shifted again, stronger now, reaching deeper into the lane. It catches on metal edges, on polished wood, on the faint sheen of fabric. The city is fully awake, though it still moves with a measured pace. No rush, just continuation. A bell sounds in the distance. You notice it, but it does not interrupt the rhythm here. Instead, it settles into it another layer in the pattern that holds everything together. You take a slow breath. The air feels warmer, now filled with effort, with purpose. You can almost sense the accumulation of small actions, each one contributing to something larger. A chair being shaped, a cloth being woven, a tool being repaired. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, yet everything necessary. As you reach the end of the lane, it begins to open once more, hinting at another part of the city waiting just beyond. The sounds behind you continue steady and dependable, as if they will carry on whether you are there to hear them or not. You take one last step forward. You step out of the working lane and into a quieter stretch where the sounds of craft fade behind you, and something more domestic begins to take shape. The street here feels softer, less defined by trade and more by living. Doors are closed or only slightly ajar. Windows reveal small glimpses rather than full views. The pace slows not because there is less to do, but because the work has shifted inward. You pause near a doorway that stands open just enough to invite a glance. Inside, the space is dim compared to the street, but not dark. Light filters in through a small window, and from the hearth where a low fire burns steadily. The glow is warm, steady and deeply grounding. It flickers against the walls, catching on simple objects that fill the room without crowding it. A hearth sits at the centre of it all. An established historical understanding tells us that the hearth was the heart of most medieval homes, providing heat, light, and a place for cooking. As you look inside, that truth feels immediate. Everything in the room seems to orient itself around that fire. A pot hangs above it, suspended by a simple iron hook. Steam rises slowly from within, carrying a scent that is both plain and comforting. Something thick, something sustaining. You cannot identify it exactly, but you know it is meant to feel to last, to support the rhythm of the day. A figure moves within the room. She steps toward the hearth, lifting the lid of the pot with a cloth-wrapped hand. The steam thickens for a moment, then settles again as she stirs. Her movements are unhurried, practiced, shaped by repetition rather than instruction. You remain at the threshold, not intruding, not entirely separate, just observing. The floor inside is packed earth, worn smooth in places where footsteps have passed most often. A bench sits along one wall, its surface marked by use. Nearby, a small table holds a few simple items: a wooden bowl, a piece of cloth, something wrapped and set aside for later. The space feels full but not cluttered. Everything has a place, even if that place is defined by habit rather than design. A lesser known detail is that many medieval homes were shared by multiple people, sometimes including extended family or even apprentices, creating a sense of closeness that modern spaces rarely replicate. As you look around, you can imagine how this room might hold more than just the one figure you see now. A faint sound comes from above. A footstep, soft but clear. There is another level to the house, reached by a narrow ladder or stair you cannot quite see from where you stand. The idea of sleeping above the warmth of the hearth makes sense. Heat rises, comfort follows. The woman glances toward the sound, then returns to her task. There is no surprise in her movement, only acknowledgement. You take a slow breath. The air here is different from the street, warmer, heavier, carrying the scent of smoke, of food, of something lived in. It settles around you, not unpleasant, just present. It feels like a place where time moves in a quieter way, measured by meals, by light, by the needs of those inside. A child appears at the edge of the room. You do not see where they came from, only that they are suddenly there, standing near the bench watching. Their presence is calm, familiar. They lean slightly against the wood, their attention fixed on the pot, as if waiting for something that is both ordinary and important. The woman speaks to them, her voice low. You do not catch the words, but the tone is gentle, instructive. The child nods, then moves closer, reaching for something on the table. A task is given, a small responsibility. It is carried out without question. Scholars continue to examine how much of daily life in medieval households was shaped by necessity rather than choice. As you watch this quiet exchange, it feels clear that roles are learned early, not through formal teaching, but through presence, through repetition. You step back slightly, giving the space its privacy. The doorway remains open, but it no longer feels like yours to linger in. You have seen enough to understand enough to carry the impression with you. You move on. The street continues lined with similar homes, each one holding its own version of what you have just witnessed. Some doors are closed. Others reveal brief glimpses. A hand placing something on a shelf. A figure bending to tie a cord. A flicker of movement that disappears as quickly as it appears. The smell of cooking drifts from more than one place now. Different variations, subtle changes. One sharper, perhaps, herbs added. Another heavier, thicker, suggesting something left to simmer longer. Each one speaks of a household beginning its day preparing for what comes next. You pass a doorway where laughter spills out briefly. It is soft, not loud, but it carries warmth. A moment of lightness before the day settles into its fuller shape. You find yourself smiling without realizing it, the sound reaching you in a way that feels immediate and genuine. An interesting note from the period is that despite the challenges of daily life, moments of comfort and familiarity were deeply valued, often centered around food, family, and shared space. You can feel that here, not as a grand idea, but as something small and steady. Above a window opens. A cloth is shaken out, releasing a faint cloud of dust that catches the light before drifting away. The motion is quick, efficient part of a routine that repeats day after day. You continue walking. The street remains quiet but not empty. Movement happens in small ways. A door opening, a figure passing from one house to another, a voice calling softly from inside. The bells still sound in the distance, though they feel farther away now, less central. Here the rhythm is different. It is shaped by the needs of the household, by the steady cycle of preparation and care. You take another slow breath. The warmth lingers even as you move away from the open doorways. It feels like something you carry with you, a reminder that beyond the public spaces, beyond the markets and workshops, the city is held together by these quieter moments, by firelight, by simple meals, by the steady presence of those who live within its walls. You walk on, letting the street guide you forward once more. You follow the street as it dips slightly, the ground beneath your feet changing in subtle ways that you feel before you fully notice them. The surface becomes damp in patches, darker in tone, and faint lines begin to appear along the edges, shallow channels that guide something quietly moving. Water, not clean, not entirely still, but present. The air shifts again, carrying a sharper note, now something less comforting than the warmth of hearth smoke or cooking. It is not overwhelming, but it asks for your attention in a different way, reminding you that the city's life depends not only on what is made and shared, but on what is discarded, redirected, managed. You step carefully, adjusting your pace as the ground grows more uneven. A widely recognised aspect of medieval urban life is that access to clean water was limited and often shared through wells, rivers, or public conduits. As you move forward, you begin to see how that reality shapes everything around you. A small well stands just ahead, set slightly back from the main path. It is simple, built from stone, worn smooth by use. A wooden frame supports a rope that disappears into the dark opening below. The rope is frayed in places, evidence of countless hands, pulling it upward, lowering it again, repeating the same motion day after day. A woman stands beside it, drawing water. She pulls steadily, her movements practiced, her posture balanced. The bucket emerges, slowly dripping as it rises. She pauses briefly to adjust her grip, then lifts it over the edge and sets it down with a soft, controlled motion. The sound of water shifting inside the bucket is gentle, almost soothing. You watch as she takes a moment to steady herself, then lifts the bucket and turns away. Her steps careful but confident. This is not a task that allows for distraction. It requires attention, strength, and a kind of quiet patience. You move closer to the well, not to use it, but to observe. Looking down, you see only darkness. The surface of the water is too far below to catch the light. It exists as an idea more than a visible presence, something you trust is there because it must be. An interesting observation noted by researchers is that wells could become contaminated over time, especially in densely populated areas, leading to ongoing challenges in maintaining safe water sources. As you stand here, you can imagine how difficult it would be to separate what is clean from what is not. You step back, allowing space for another person to approach. A man arrives, carrying two smaller containers. He nods briefly to you, then sets them down and begins his own work with the rope. His movements mirror the woman's, though slightly quicker, as if shaped by a different rhythm. The repetition is almost meditative. Pull, pause, lift, set down. You continue on. The street narrows again, and the channels along its edges become more noticeable. Thin streams of water move slowly, guided by the slight incline of the ground. They carry with them fragments of the city's daily life, small remnants that drift without urgency. You step over one of these channels, placing your foot carefully on a drier patch of ground. The smell intensifies briefly, then softens as you move past it. A lesser known detail is that some cities attempted to regulate waste disposal by assigning specific times or methods, though these systems were often inconsistent in practice. What you see here feels like a balance between intention and reality, an effort to manage what cannot be entirely controlled. You pass a doorway where a bucket is being emptied into the channel. The action is quick, almost routine. The person does not linger, does not look up. The task is completed, and they step back inside, closing the door behind them. You continue walking, your awareness sharpened. The city feels different in this part, not less alive, but more exposed. The processes that support daily life are visible here in ways they are not elsewhere. Nothing is hidden behind polished surfaces or distant systems. It is all present, all immediate. A narrow alley branches off to your right. You glance down and see that it slopes more steeply, the channels deeper, the movement of water more pronounced. The light does not reach as easily into that space, and the air feels heavier, holding onto scents that linger longer than they should. You do not turn into it. Instead, you remain on the main path, where the balance between movement and openness feels more manageable. The sound of voices reaches you again, though quieter here. Two figures stand near a doorway, speaking in low tones. Their conversation pauses as you pass, then resumes softer still. There is an awareness in their posture, a sense that this part of the city carries a different kind of attention. Experts continue to explore how medieval residents adapted to these conditions, developing habits and routines that allowed them to live alongside challenges that would feel overwhelming today. As you move through this space, you begin to understand that adaptation is not a single act, but a continuous process. You adjust your path again, stepping around another damp patch. The rhythm of your movement changes, slightly more deliberate now, more aware of where each step lands. It is not difficult, but it requires attention in a way that smoother ground does not. A bell sounds in the distance, fainter here, filtered through the narrower streets and the layers of the city. It reaches you as a reminder, a connection to the wider rhythm beyond this immediate space. You pause for a moment, not because you need to, but because the city seems to invite it, to notice, to adjust, to understand. The water continues its slow path along the channels, carrying with it the traces of countless small actions. The well behind you continues to serve those who come to it. The doorways open and close, each one revealing and concealing in turn. Nothing here is dramatic. Nothing calls for attention in a loud way. Yet everything matters. You take a slow breath, letting the air settle, letting your senses adjust once more. Then you step forward, leaving this part of the city behind as the street begins to rise again, hinting at a different rhythm waiting just ahead. The ground begins to level out as you move away from the damp channels, and the air shifts again, this time carrying something sharper, more distinct. It reaches you before you fully understand it, a scent that is not entirely unpleasant, but unmistakably tied to something raw and immediate. You slow your pace. Ahead, the street narrows once more, but in a different way than before. The buildings here lean closer, their upper stories nearly touching in places, creating a corridor that feels enclosed, almost protected from the wider city. Light filters down in thin strips, catching on surfaces that are darker, more worn, more frequently touched. You have entered the shambles. Even if you did not know the name, you would feel the difference. A well-known historical point is that this street was associated with butchers, and the meat trade, its layout shaped by the needs of that work. As you walk forward, you begin to see how every detail reflects that purpose. Wooden counters extend from the front of several shops, their surfaces smooth from constant use. Hooks hang above them, empty for now, or holding pieces wrapped in cloth. The wood itself bears marks that speak of repetition, of cutting, of preparation, carried out day after day. The smell deepens. It is not overwhelming, not at this hour, but it is present. A trace of iron, faint but recognizable, mixed with the scent of smoke and something else you cannot quite place. It lingers at the edges of your awareness, reminding you of the work that happens here. You pass a shop where a figure stands just inside the doorway. He is arranging something on the counter, his movement steady and precise. A cloth is lifted, adjusted, smoothed. He does not rush. There is a method to it, a sequence that has been learned and repeated until it requires little thought. You keep your steps measured. The ground beneath you is slightly different here, worn in a way that reflects the specific use of the street. There are shallow grooves, subtle depressions, where water once flowed more freely. You imagine how this place must feel later in the day when activity increases, when the space fills with movement and sound. For now, it remains in a state of preparation. A curious detail recorded in historical accounts is that some streets like this were designed with slight slopes or channels to help carry away waste from the trade. As you look down, you can see faint traces of that design, though time has softened its clarity. You step carefully, not out of discomfort, but out of awareness. A door opens nearby, and another figure steps out carrying a bucket. He moves with purpose, crossing the narrow space and disappearing into a side passage. The action is quick practiced, part of a routine that requires no announcement. You continue forward. Above you, the buildings feel even closer now. Wooden beams stretch overhead, creating a sense of enclosure that is almost complete. If you were to reach upward, you might nearly touch the structure above, feel the texture of wood that has stood through countless seasons. The light shifts as clouds move across the sky, and for a moment the street darkens slightly, the details becoming softer, more muted. Then the light returns, catching on the edges of the counters, on the faint sheen of surfaces that have been cleaned and prepared. You notice how quiet it still is. There are sounds, yes. The movement of cloth, the soft thud of something being set down, a low voice speaking from within one of the shops. But the larger noise you might expect has not yet arrived. This is the beginning, the moment before the work fully reveals itself. Researchers have long discussed how trades like butchery were both essential and carefully regulated within medieval towns, balancing necessity with concerns about cleanliness and order. As you walk through this space, that balance feels tangible, held in the way everything is arranged in the quiet discipline of those preparing their work. You pass another shop. This one is darker inside the light from the doorway, not reaching far enough to reveal everything. You catch only glimpses, a surface, a shape, movement that suggests preparation without showing it fully. You do not need to see more. The city offers enough. A faint sound reaches you from behind, footsteps more than before. You glance back briefly and see that others have begun to enter the street, their presence adding to the subtle shift in atmosphere. The day is moving forward, and with it this place will change. You turn back and continue. A piece of cloth hanging from a beam brushes lightly against your shoulder as you pass. The contact is brief, almost accidental, but it grounds you in the physical reality of the space. Nothing here is distant. Everything is close immediate part of the same shared environment. An unusual note from the period is that some butchers displayed their goods in ways that emphasized freshness and quality, relying on visual cues rather than long-term storage. Even now, in this early hour, you can sense that attention to presentation, the careful arrangement, the readiness for what is to come. You reach the end of the narrowest part of the street. It begins to open slightly, the buildings pulling back just enough to allow more light, more air. The smell softens as you move away, blending again with the broader sense of the city. You take a slow breath. The experience lingers not as something overwhelming, but as a clear impression. A part of the city that serves a necessary role shaped by practical needs and careful habits. Behind you, the shambles continues to wake. Ahead, the city waits with another shift in rhythm, another layer of life ready to unfold. You step forward, leaving the narrow street behind. You move into a broader street where the air feels lighter again, as if the city is gently offering you space to reset your senses. The closeness of the shambles fades behind you, replaced by a more open rhythm of movement. Here the sounds are softer, more varied, less tied to a single trade. You notice people more clearly now, not as passing figures, but as individuals moving through their own patterns, their own responsibilities. A woman crosses the street ahead of you, carrying a basket balanced against her hip. Her steps are steady, practiced, her posture shaped by repetition rather than effort. You follow at a distance, not intentionally, but naturally. She turns into a doorway, disappearing from view, and you are left with the impression of motion of purpose that continues beyond what you can see. A widely acknowledged aspect of medieval urban life is that women played essential roles in both household management and economic activity, though their contributions were often less formally recorded than those of men. As you walk, you begin to notice how present they are in every part of the city. A small stall stands near the edge of the street. Behind it, another woman arranges items with quiet care. The goods are simple. Small bundles, perhaps herbs or prepared food, each tied or wrapped in a way that suggests both practicality and attention. She adjusts their placement, then steps back slightly, considering the arrangement before making another small change. There is a rhythm to it, not hurried, not idle. You approach slowly, not to purchase, but to observe. She glances up briefly, meeting your gaze for just a moment. There is no surprise there, only acknowledgement. Then her attention returns to her work as if the interaction has already reached its natural conclusion. You move on. A doorway stands open nearby, and inside, you see another scene unfolding. A woman kneels beside a low table, her hands moving steadily as she works with a piece of cloth. The fabric shifts under her fingers, folding, smoothing, shaping into something more structured. A child sits nearby, watching, not idle but attentive. At a certain point, the woman pauses and hands the cloth to the child. A small instruction follows, quiet but clear. The child nods, then begins to mimic the movements, slower, less certain, but guided by what they have just seen. An intriguing observation from historical records is that many skills were passed informally within households, especially among women, through observation and imitation, rather than formal apprenticeship systems. You can see that process here unfolding in real time. You continue along the street. The sounds shift again, though subtly. A low conversation from one doorway. The soft scrape of something being moved across the surface. The faint clink of pottery being set down carefully. You pass a group of women gathered near a well or shared space. Their voices overlap gently, creating a pattern that feels both social and functional. They speak while they work, hands moving as they lift, carry, adjust. The conversation seems to flow without interruption, weaving through tasks rather than pausing for them. You catch fragments. A mention of time, a reference to someone not present, a brief laugh that rises and falls quickly like a ripple across still water. There is ease here, not because the work is light, but because it is shared familiar. You slow slightly, letting yourself absorb the scene. Experts continue to examine how communal spaces allowed for the exchange of information and support, especially among women whose work often kept them close to home. As you watch, it feels clear that these moments are not separate from labour, but part of it. You move on again. A figure approaches from the opposite direction carrying a small bundle wrapped tightly in cloth. As she passes, you notice the way she holds it close, protective, as if it contains something important, something that requires care. You do not ask. You simply let the moment pass. A window above opens slightly, and a voice calls down. The words are brief, direct. A response comes from below, just as quick. The exchange is efficient, shaped by familiarity, by an understanding that does not require elaboration. You notice how much of life here happens in these small interactions. Brief, functional, yet meaningful. A lesser known detail is that women in medieval cities could sometimes operate businesses, particularly in trades like brewing or small-scale selling, though their opportunities varied depending on time and place. As you walk, you begin to see traces of that presence, not always obvious, but woven into the fabric of the city. A doorway ahead reveals a larger interior space. Inside, several women move about, each engaged in a different task. One stirs a pot, another measures something carefully, a third arranges items on a shelf. The activity is coordinated not through direct instruction, but through an unspoken understanding of who does what and when. You pause for a moment at the edge. The scene feels balanced, not quiet, not loud, just steady. A child moves between them, carrying a small item from one place to another. The motion is purposeful, contributing to the larger pattern without drawing attention to itself. You step back, allowing the space to remain its own. The street continues, and you follow. The light has grown stronger now, filling the spaces between buildings more fully. The air feels warmer, though still touched by the lingering coolness of early morning. The bells sound again, faint but present. You notice them differently now, not as something separate, but as part of everything else. A thread that runs through the city, connecting these moments, these movements, these lives. You take a slow breath. There's a sense of continuity here, of routines that repeat and evolve, shaped by necessity, by tradition, by the quiet persistence of daily life. And as you continue forward, you carry with you the understanding that much of what holds this city together is not always visible at first glance. It is found in these smaller spaces, these steady hands, these quiet exchanges that shape the rhythm of the day. You continue along the street as it narrows slightly, again, though not with the closeness of the shambles. Here the space feels balance between movement and pause, between purpose and observation. The sounds around you shift towards something lighter, quicker, less measured than the steady rhythms of craft or household work. A burst of motion catches your eye. A group of children moves across the street, their steps uneven but energetic, their voices rising and falling in patterns that feel unstructured yet familiar. One runs ahead, then slows, turning back, as if to check whether the others follow. They do. Always. You pause, letting them pass. Their presence changes the atmosphere, even if only briefly. The city feels less contained, more open, as if these moments of play loosen the structure that holds everything else in place. A broadly supported historical insight is that children in medieval towns often began contributing to work at a young age, though their days still included moments of play woven between responsibilities. As you watch them, it becomes clear that these two aspects are not separate but intertwined. One child carries a small stick, dragging it lightly along the wall as they move. The sound is soft, rhythmic, a quiet accompaniment to their steps. Another holds something in their hand, turning it over repeatedly as if examining it from every angle. They disappear around a corner, their voices fading. You continue on. The street here holds signs of instruction, of learning in its many forms. Not formal in the way you might expect, but present all the same. A doorway stands open, revealing a small interior where a young figure stands beside an older one. The older person gestures towards something on a table, their hand moving slowly, deliberately. The younger watches closely, then repeats the motion, less certain but guided. An intriguing point raised by historians is that apprenticeship systems formed a key part of urban life, allowing skills to pass from one generation to the next through long periods of close supervision. As you observe this quiet exchange, it feels less like teaching and more like shaping a gradual process that unfolds over time. You move a little closer though, still outside. The sounds are soft. A tool being set down. A brief correction spoken in a low voice. A pause, then another attempt. There is no urgency, only expectation. You step back and continue walking. A child sits on a low step just ahead, their attention fixed on something in their hands. You slow as you approach, curious, without needing to know exactly why. As you draw nearer, you see that they are working with a small piece of wood carving, or shaping it with a simple tool. The movements are careful, focused. You wonder who showed them how to do this, and how long it took for their hands to learn the pressure, the angle, the patience required. A lesser known detail is that children often learned by imitation long before formal apprenticeship began, picking up skills simply by being present in working environments. This moment feels like an extension of that idea, a quiet preparation for something more structured later. The child glances up as you pass, their expression neutral, neither curious nor guarded. Then their attention returns to the task, as if the work itself holds more importance than anything else. You move on. The street opens slightly into a small space where a few older youths stand together. Their posture is different from the younger children, more contained, more aware. They speak in lower tones, their conversation carrying a hint of something more serious, though still not fully adult. One gestures with their hands, emphasizing a point. Another listens, then responds, their voice steady. There is a sense of transition here, of moving between stages of learning, not just skills, but roles. Experts continue to examine how young people navigated this shift, balancing dependence with increasing responsibility. As you watch, it feels like a gradual process, shaped by expectation rather than sudden change. You continue past them, the sound of their conversation fading behind you. A doorway ahead reveals another scene. Inside, a group of children sits on the floor, gathered around a figure who speaks softly. You cannot hear the words clearly, but the tone suggests instruction. Perhaps a lesson in reading or prayer, or something else considered important enough to pass on in this way. The children listen, some more attentively than others. One shifts slightly, another adjusts their position, but the group remains focused, held together by the quiet presence of the speaker. You do not linger long. The moment feels private, even though it is visible. You step away and continue. The light has grown stronger, now filling the street, with a gentle brightness that reveals more detail, more texture. The city feels fully awake, though still far from hurried. The bells sound again, faint but steady. You notice how they intersect with these moments of learning, of growing, not directly, but as part of the larger structure that shapes the day. Time moves forward, whether marked by bells or by the slow accumulation of experience. An unusual observation, recorded in some accounts, is that childhood in the medieval period was not always seen as a distinct phase in the way we understand it today, but more as an early stage of participation in adult life. As you walk through these scenes, that idea begins to make sense. The boundaries are softer, the transitions less defined. You take a slow breath. There is something grounding in this continuity, in the way life unfolds without sharp divisions. Play becomes work, observation becomes skill, presence becomes understanding. You continue forward, the street leading you onward, carrying with you the quiet impressions of movement, of growth, of the many small beginnings that shape what comes next. You follow the street as it gradually widens again, and with that widening comes a shift in feeling. The movement here is less familiar, less patterned. Faces change more often. Clothing varies in subtle ways. The rhythm of the space feels less settled, as if the city is opening itself to those who do not belong to its daily routines. You notice it first in the way people carry themselves. A man walks past you with a pack slung across his back, the straps worn but strong. His steps are steady, though not entirely relaxed. There is a watchfulness in his gaze, a quiet assessment of everything around him. He's not uncomfortable, but he's not at ease either. You recognise the difference. He is passing through. A widely accepted historical observation is that cities like York served as important stops for travellers, merchants and pilgrims, bringing a steady flow of outsiders into the urban environment. As you continue, you begin to see more of them. A group stands near the entrance of a building that looks slightly larger than the others. Its doorway is wider, its structure more open, as if designed to receive rather than contain. A sign hangs above, simple but clear in its purpose. This is an inn. You move closer, drawn by the subtle change in sound. Voices here carry a different tone. Less familiar, less intertwined. They overlap in ways that suggest recent meetings rather than long-standing relationships. A question is asked, an answer follows. Another voice joins, adding something new. You step just inside the doorway. The air is warmer here, filled with the scent of food, of drinker bodies that have travelled and now pause. A few figures sit at a table, their belongings set beside them or at their feet. Their clothing shows signs of distance, dust along the edges, fabric that does not quite match what you have seen elsewhere in the city. An interesting detail noted by historians is that inns often served as hubs of information where news stories and rumours moved as freely as goods and people. As you listen, you begin to catch fragments of that exchange. A place mentioned, a road described, a distance measured not in miles but in time and effort. You do not need to understand everything to feel the weight of it. A woman moves between the tables carrying a tray with practiced ease. She sets it down carefully, distributing its contents without hesitation. Her movements are efficient, shaped by repetition, but there is also an awareness in the way she observes the room, adjusting to its needs as they shift. A lesser-known point is that many inns relied heavily on the labour of women who managed both practical tasks and the social flow of the space. As you watch her, it becomes clear that her role extends beyond serving. She maintains balance, ensuring that the room continues to function smoothly. You step back towards the doorway, allowing others to pass. A pair of travellers enters their conversation, continuing as they cross the threshold. Their voices carry a different rhythm shaped by distance, by the experience of movement rather than settlement. You catch a word that feels unfamiliar. Another that sounds almost the same, but not quite. The city absorbs these differences without resistance, folding them into its daily life. You move outside again. The street feels different now that you have seen what lies within. The presence of travellers is no longer abstract. It is visible, audible, woven into the flow of movement. A man stands near the entrance, adjusting something on his pack. You notice the way he checks the straps, the careful attention to how the weight is distributed. It is a small action, but it speaks of long journeys of the need to carry everything that matters with you. You continue walking. Another building stands nearby, smaller but similar in purpose. Its door is open, though the interior is quieter. A single figure sits inside their posture, relaxed, as if they have already arrived and settled into a temporary pause. Experts continue to explore how travel shaped medieval cities, not just economically but culturally, introducing new ideas, goods, and perspectives. As you move through this space, you begin to sense that exchange, subtle but constant. A voice calls out from across the street. You turn slightly and see a figure gesturing towards someone approaching. Their tone is welcoming, though measured. The interaction that follows is brief, but it carries the weight of recognition even if it is newly formed. You walk on. The sounds of the inns begin to fade behind you, replaced once again by the steadier rhythms of the city. Yet something lingers. A sense of connection to places beyond these walls, to roads that stretch outward in every direction. A curious observation from some accounts is that medieval travellers often relied on a combination of local knowledge and shared stories to navigate unfamiliar places. As you think about this, you realise that what you have just witnessed is part of that network, a living exchange of information that shapes movement across distances. You pass a small group gathered near the edge of the street. Their conversation is quieter, more focused. One points in a particular direction, tracing a path in the air with their hand. The others watch, then nod as if committing the route to memory. You do not interrupt. You simply observe, then continue. The bells sound again, faint but steady. You notice how they reach even here, threading through conversations, through the arrival and departure of strangers. They connect this place to the rest of the city, reminding you that even those who pass through are briefly part of its rhythm. You take a slow breath. The air feels fuller now, carrying traces of distant places, of movement, of stories that extend beyond what you can see. And as you continue forward, you carry with you the sense that York is not only a place where people live, but a place where journeys intersect, where paths cross, and then separate again, leaving behind only the faintest impressions. You move onward, and the street begins to draw your gaze upward without asking permission. The buildings no longer dominate your view in quite the same way. Something larger rises beyond them, something that gathers the light and holds it. Stone, tall, pale, and deliberate. You see it first between rooftops, then more fully as the street opens into a broader space. The structure stands ahead of you with a quiet certainty that feels different from everything else you have seen so far. The Minster. You slow without deciding to. The scale of it changes your pace, your breath, even the way you carry yourself. The walls rise higher than the surrounding buildings, their surfaces marked not by rough utility, but by careful shaping, by intention that reaches beyond immediate need. A widely accepted historical fact is that York Minster was one of the largest and most significant cathedrals in medieval England, reflecting both religious devotion and the wealth of the city. As you stand before it, that sense of importance feels undeniable. The entrance stands open. You approach drawn by something that is not quite curiosity and not quite reverence, but something between the two. The air near the doorway feels cooler, as if the stone itself holds onto a different kind of temperature, a different rhythm. You step inside. The sound changes immediately. Outside the city carried a constant murmur. Here, that murmur softens, stretches, becomes something else entirely. Your footsteps echo faintly, the sound rising and fading in a way that feels almost distant from your own movement. Light filters through tall windows, coloured and shaped by glass, that transforms it into something softer, more complex. It falls across the stone floor in quiet patterns, shifting slightly as the morning continues. You pause, not because you must, but because the space invites it. An interesting observation from historians is that cathedrals like this were designed not only for worship, but to inspire a sense of awe through scale, light and sound. Standing here, you feel that effect without needing it explained. The ceiling rises high above you, supported by columns that seem both solid and impossibly slender. They draw your gaze upward, encouraging you to follow their lines until they meet in shapes that feel almost weightless. A figure moves in the distance. Their steps are slow, measured, their presence quiet enough that it does not disturb the stillness. They pass between columns, their form briefly framed by the light, before blending again into the dimmer spaces. You walk forward, your steps instinctively softer. The air carries a faint scent of wax and something older, something that has settled into the stone over time. It is not strong, but it is present, adding to the sense that this place holds more than just the moment you are in. A row of candles burns along one side. Their flames are small, steady, each one holding its own space within the larger stillness. You watch one for a moment, noticing how it moves, how it responds to the slightest shift in air. A lesser known detail is that candles were often used not only for illumination, but as part of devotional practices representing prayers or intentions. As you stand there, you can imagine how each flame might carry meaning beyond its light. You continue walking. The space opens further, revealing more of its structure, more of its quiet complexity. The floor beneath you feels smoother than the streets. Outside, worn in a different way, shaped by footsteps that move more slowly, more deliberately. A voice begins somewhere ahead. It is not loud, not meant to carry far, but the acoustics of the space allow it to travel gently. The words are indistinct, but the tone is clear, measured, intentional. It rises and falls in a pattern that feels familiar even if you do not fully understand it. You stop again, listening. The sound does not demand your attention, yet it holds it. Scholars continue to discuss how much of medieval religious experience was shaped by sensory elements like sound and light rather than purely by doctrine. As you stand here, it feels as though those elements work together, creating an atmosphere that surrounds rather than instructs. You take a slow breath. The stillness is not empty. It is full in a quieter way, holding layers of presence that reveal themselves gradually. A figure kneels nearby, their posture, still their focus inward. You do not watch for long. The moment feels personal even within this shared space. You move on. The light shifts again as clouds pass outside, changing the colours that fall across the floor. For a moment, the space feels darker, more enclosed. Then the light returns, and with it the subtle patterns that move across the stone. An unusual note recorded in some accounts is that cathedrals often took generations to complete, with different phases of construction reflecting changing styles and resources. As you look around, you can sense that layering not as something obvious, but as a quiet accumulation of effort over time. You walk slowly toward the far end, then pause once more. There is no need to rush. The city outside continues its rhythm, steady and ongoing, but here time feels stretched, softened, less defined. The bells sound again. This time you hear them differently, not as something distant, but as something connected to this place, to the structure around you. The sound fills the space, not loudly, but completely settling into the stone, into the air, into you. You stand for a moment longer, then gently you turn and begin to walk back toward the entrance. The light grows brighter as you approach the doorway. The sounds of the city return in slowly, layering themselves over the quiet you leave behind. You step outside. The street feels different now. Not changed, but seen through a new awareness, shaped by the stillness you have just experienced. And as you take another step forward, the rhythm of York resumes around you, steady and unbroken. You step back into the street, carrying a trace of the Minster's stillness with you, though it begins to soften almost immediately. The sounds return first. Footsteps, voices, the faint roll of a cart somewhere beyond your sight. Then the smells follow, layered and familiar, reminding you that the city moves forward without pause. As you continue, something shifts. It is subtle at first. A different kind of quiet. Not the calm of early morning or the contained hush of the Minster, but a quieter attention, as if the space ahead asks for a gentler awareness. You notice a building set slightly apart. Not larger, not more ornate, but different in its openness. The doorway is wider, the threshold more frequently crossed. People move in and out with a steadiness that feels purposeful, though not hurried. You slow. A commonly accepted historical understanding is that medieval cities maintained hospitals or care houses often run by religious groups where the sick and poor could receive basic care. As you approach, you begin to sense that this is one of those places. The air here carries a different mixture, less of smoke, more of something faintly herbal, a sharpness that suggests preparation, an attempt to influence the body in ways that are not entirely understood but deeply relied upon. You step closer to the doorway. Inside, the light is softer, filtered through smaller openings. The space is arranged with simplicity. Low beds or pallets line the walls, each occupied or waiting to be. Figures move between them, their steps careful, their voices kept low. You remain at the threshold. A woman passes near the entrance carrying a small bowl. The scent that follows her is stronger now, a blend of crushed leaves and something bitter. She moves with focus, her attention directed towards someone just out of your view. You hear a voice, not loud but strained. It rises briefly, then settles again, as if effort itself must be measured. You do not step inside. Instead, you observe from where you stand, aware that this is a space where presence is different, where time does not move in the same steady way as the streets outside. An intriguing point raised by scholars is that medieval medicine combined practical observation with spiritual belief, often treating illness through a mixture of remedies, prayers, and environmental care. As you watch, it feels less like a system and more like an attempt to respond to do something rather than nothing. A figure sits beside one of the beds. Their posture is still, their attention fixed. A hand rests lightly on the edge of the pallet, not moving, not intervening, simply present. The quietness of that gesture feels as important as any action. You take a slow breath. The air here is heavier, not unpleasant, but weighted with something you cannot fully name. Concern, perhaps, or the awareness of fragility that does not always show itself elsewhere. You step back slightly, giving space. A man enters his steps, hesitant for just a moment before he continues forward. He carries nothing yet. His presence feels full, as if he brings with him something unseen. He moves toward one of the beds, and you notice the way his shoulders settle as he reaches it. Relief or acceptance. You cannot be sure. A lesser known detail is that care in such places was often as much about comfort as cure, providing shelter and attention even when remedies were limited. As you watch, that distinction becomes clear. Not everything here can be fixed, but something can still be offered. You turn away gently. The street receives you again, its sounds returning in layers that feel almost brighter after the subdued tones within. A cart passes its wheels louder than before. A voice calls out sharper, more immediate. The contrast is noticeable, though not jarring. You continue walking. The city resumes its rhythm, but you carry with you a new awareness, a recognition of how easily that rhythm can be interrupted, how closely life and uncertainty exist side by side. A group stands nearby, speaking in low voices. Their conversation is not entirely clear, but you catch a word that suggests concern, another that hints at hope. The tones shift between them, moving gently from one to the other. Experts continue to explore how communities responded to illness, not only through care, but through shared understanding, through the ways people supported one another in uncertain times. As you observe this quiet exchange, it feels like an extension of what you have just seen. You move on. The street begins to feel more familiar again, its patterns easier to follow. The light has strengthened, filling the spaces between buildings more completely. The air feels warmer though, still touched by the underlying presence of the city's many layers. A bell sounds in the distance. You hear it clearly though, it does not pull your attention in the same way as before. Instead, it settles into the background part of the ongoing structure that holds everything together. You take another slow breath. The memory of the space you just left lingers not as something heavy, but as something grounding. A reminder that beneath the steady flow of daily life, there are moments that require stillness, care, and quiet attention. You walk on, letting the street guide you forward once more. You continue along the street, and gradually the atmosphere shifts again, though this time the change feels sharper, more defined. The sounds ahead carry a different tone. Voices are firmer, movements more deliberate. There is a sense of structure here that goes beyond routine, something tied to authority rather than habit. The space opens into a small square, not large, but clear enough to gather attention. The ground is even more intentionally maintained, and the buildings around it feel slightly more formal in their arrangement. You slow as you enter, sensing that this is not a place people pass through without noticing. A generally accepted historical reality is that medieval towns enforced order through a combination of local courts, officials, and public displays of justice. As you stand here, you begin to see how that might take shape. A group has gathered near one side of the square, not tightly packed, but close enough to suggest shared focus. Their attention is directed toward a single point, though from where you stand, you cannot yet see exactly what holds it. You move a little closer. A wooden structure stands at the centre of that attention. Simple, functional, unadorned. A set of stocks. You recognise it even before you fully register the details. The wood is worn smooth in places marked by repeated use. The openings are shaped to hold, to restrict, to make visible. A figure stands beside it speaking. Their voice carries clearly, not raised in anger, but firm enough to be heard. The words are measured, deliberate, shaped by a role that requires clarity more than emotion. You cannot catch every word, but you understand enough. A complaint, a judgment, a consequence. An intriguing observation often noted by historians is that public punishments were designed not only to discipline individuals, but to reinforce social norms through visibility. As you watch, it becomes clear that this moment is as much about the gathering as it is about the person at its centre. The figure being addressed stands quietly. Their posture is still their expression, difficult to read from this distance. There is no resistance, no visible protest, only a presence that feels contained, held within the structure of the moment. You remain at the edge of the crowd, not part of it, but not separate either. The voices around you are low murmured, carrying fragments of opinion. a word of agreement, a brief comment, a quiet reaction that passes from one person to another without rising above the surface. A lesser known detail is that reputation played a significant role in medieval communities, with public perception often influencing both judgment and consequence. As you listen, you begin to sense how these opinions shape the atmosphere, how they contribute to the weight of the moment. The official continues speaking, then stops. A pause follows, brief but noticeable. The figure is guided forward. The movement is not forceful, but it is directed. The structure is used as intended, the action carried out with a practiced familiarity that suggests this is not an unusual occurrence. You look away for a moment, not out of discomfort, but out of instinct. The moment does not need your full attention to be understood. The crowd remains. Not for long. Gradually, people begin to move again, their attention shifting back to their own paths, their own concerns. The square does not empty all at once, but it loosens the focus, dissolving into smaller fragments. A conversation resumes nearby. A different one this time. Lighter, unrelated. The city continues. Researchers have examined how justice in medieval towns often relied on visibility and participation rather than separation and distance. As you stand here, it feels clear that what you have witnessed is part of a larger system, one that blends authority with community in ways that are both direct and complex. You take a slow breath. The air feels unchanged, yet something in your awareness has shifted. The space now carries a memory, a sense of what has taken place here before and would likely take place again. You begin to move on. The square narrows back into a street, the structure of authority giving way once more to the steady flow of daily life. The sounds soften, the voices disperse, the rhythm returns to something more familiar. A figure passes you, their expression neutral, their steps steady. There is no lingering tension, only continuation. An unusual note from some accounts is that public punishment could sometimes draw crowds, not only for its seriousness, but for its role as a shared experience, a moment where the boundaries of behaviour were reinforced collectively. As you think about this, you realise that the gathering you just witnessed was not only about consequence, but about understanding where those boundaries lie. You walk on. The bells sound again, distant but present. They reach into this space just as they do everywhere else, connecting moments of order with moments of routine, weaving everything into a single ongoing pattern. You take another breath, letting the air settle. The city moves forward, carrying with it both the quiet and the firm, the gentle and the structured. And you move with it. You leave the small square behind, and the street guides you into a quieter quarter, where the pace feels more contained, more inward. The buildings here are similar in form to those you have already seen. Timber and plaster, narrow fronts and leaning upper floors. Yet something about the atmosphere is different. The sounds are softer, the movement more measured, as if the area holds itself with a certain caution. You slow without meaning to. A cluster of houses stands close together, their doorways marked in subtle ways. You notice small details that might otherwise pass unnoticed. The arrangement of windows, the presence of objects placed near thresholds, signs that speak quietly rather than openly. A widely recognised aspect of York's history is that it once held a significant Jewish community, particularly in the 12th century, contributing to the city's economic and social life. As you walk here, you sense traces of that presence, though they are not immediately visible in the same way as markets or guilds. You pass a doorway where a figure stands just inside. Their posture is still their attention directed outward, though not fixed on anything in particular. When your gaze meets theirs, it lingers for a moment longer than usual, not with hostility, but with a kind of careful awareness. Then it shifts away, returning to whatever thoughts occupied them before. You continue on. The street remains quiet, not empty, but restrained. A conversation takes place nearby. The voices low, the words chosen with care. You cannot hear what is said, only the tone which carries a sense of closeness, of shared understanding that does not extend beyond those speaking. An intriguing point raised by historians is that Jewish communities in medieval England often lived in designated areas, maintaining their own practices while also interacting with the broader population. As you move through this space, that balance feels present, though not easily defined. A door opens softly behind you. You turn slightly just enough to see a woman stepping out, her movements calm, deliberate. She closes the door carefully, as if ensuring something remains contained within. Then she walks past you, her gaze forward, her step steady. There is no urgency, only intention. You continue along the street. The light here feels different, filtered more heavily by the closeness of the buildings. It does not reach as deeply, leaving parts of the space in softer shadow. The effect is subtle, but it adds to the sense of enclosure of a place that does not fully open itself to the outside. A lesser known detail is that Jewish residents in medieval cities were often involved in specific trades, including money lending, due to restrictions placed upon them in other areas of economic life. This created both reliance and tension within the broader community. As you walk, you begin to feel that complexity, not as something visible in a single moment, but as an undercurrent, a presence that shapes interactions in ways that are not always spoken. You pass a small gathering near the edge of the street. Two figures stand close together, their conversation quiet, their expressions serious. A third joins them, and the dynamic shifts slightly, the tone becoming more guarded. You sense that what is being discussed carries weight, though you do not know its details. You move on. The street bends gently, revealing another cluster of buildings. Here, the signs of daily life continue as elsewhere. A window opens. A piece of cloth is shaken out. A voice calls softly from within. Yet the atmosphere remains distinct, more contained, more aware. Scholars continue to debate how relationships between Jewish communities and their Christian neighbours varied across time and place, ranging from cooperation to conflict. As you move through this area, it feels as though you are witnessing a moment held somewhere between those extremes. A child passes you their steps, quick, their attention focused on something ahead. They move with the same energy you have seen elsewhere, unaffected by the subtleties that shape the adults around them. You watch them go. For a moment the space feels lighter, then it settles again. An unusual note recorded in historical accounts is that York was the site of a tragic event in 1190 when tensions led to violence against the Jewish community. As you walk here, that knowledge does not present itself as something visible, but it lingers in the background, shaping the way you perceive the quietness of the street. You do not dwell on it. You simply carry the awareness forward. A figure stands at a doorway ahead, their posture relaxed, their gaze directed outward. As you approach, they nod slightly, a small acknowledgement that feels both polite and reserved. You return the gesture, then continue. The street begins to open again, the buildings pulling back just enough to allow more light, more movement. The atmosphere shifts once more, the contained feeling easing into something more familiar. You take a slow breath. The air feels lighter, though it still carries traces of what you have just passed through. A reminder that the city holds many layers, many experiences, not all of them visible at once. The bells sound in the distance. You hear them clearly, their tones steady, unchanged. They connect this place to every other part of the city weaving together moments of quiet tension and moments of routine into a single continuous rhythm. You step forward, leaving this street behind, carrying with you the sense of complexity of lives lived within boundaries that are both visible and unseen. You step into a street that feels warmer, though the sun itself has not changed. The difference comes from sound, from movement, from the faint rise of something more social, more relaxed. The day has progressed, and with it the city has shifted into a different rhythm. A door opens nearby and laughter spills out. It is fuller than before, less restrained, carrying with it a sense of ease that contrasts with the quieter spaces you have passed through. You follow the sound without thinking, drawn toward it as the street bends slightly. An open doorway reveals the source. Inside a room is filled with people seated at long wooden tables. Some lean forward, engaged in conversation. Others sit back, their posture looser, their attention drifting between voices and surroundings. A figure moves through the space carrying a jug, stopping briefly at each table before continuing on. This is a place of gathering. A well-established historical observation notes that alehouses and taverns were central to social life in medieval towns, offering not just drink, but a space for connection, storytelling, and shared experience. As you stand at the entrance, that role feels immediately clear. The air inside carries a mixture of scents: warm wood, cooked food, the faint sharpness of ale. It is not heavy, but it is full. You step just inside, careful not to disrupt the flow of movement. A bench stands open near the wall, and you pause beside it, observing rather than joining. The conversations overlap in a way that feels natural, each table holding its own thread, while still contributing to the larger sound of the room. A man gestures as he speaks, his hands moving to emphasize a point. Across from him another listens, nodding occasionally, their expression thoughtful rather than reactive. Nearby, a different group shares a quieter exchange. Their voices lower, their focus more contained. An interesting detail noted by historians is that ale was often safer to drink than water in medieval cities, leading to its regular consumption across many levels of society. As you watch, the presence of drink here feels less like indulgence and more like routine woven into the structure of daily life. A woman moves past you carrying a tray. Her steps are steady, her path clear, despite the shifting positions of those around her. She sets the tray down at a table, exchanges a few words, then continues on her attention, already moving to the next task. You notice how smoothly everything operates, not rigidly, but with a quiet coordination that keeps the space balanced. You move a little further in, then stop again. The light here is softer, filtered through small windows and the glow of the hearth. It creates a sense of enclosure that feels different from the narrow streets, more inviting, less constraining. A voice rises slightly above the others, not in conflict, but in storytelling. You turn your attention toward it. A figure sits at the center of a small group, their posture relaxed, their expression animated. As they speak, the others lean in slightly, their focus drawn towards the unfolding narrative. You cannot hear every word, but you catch enough to sense the shape of it. A journey, a place beyond the city, an event that holds interest, perhaps because it is distant, perhaps because it is shared. A curious detail from the period is that storytelling in communal spaces often served as both entertainment and a way of passing information, blending fact and embellishment in ways that made each telling unique. As you listen, you feel that blend, the way the story shifts slightly with each gesture, each pause. You do not stay long. The space is full, but it is not yours to occupy. You step back toward the doorway, letting the sounds follow you briefly before fading as you return to the street. Outside, the air feels cooler again. The contrast is noticeable though not abrupt. You continue walking. The street carries a similar energy now, though quieter. A group stands near a doorway, their conversation easy, their posture relaxed. Another figure passes you, humming softly under their breath, the sound barely audible but present. A scholarly perspective suggests that communal gatherings like these played a role in maintaining social cohesion, offering spaces where relationships could be reinforced outside of work and obligation. As you move through this part of the city, that idea feels grounded in what you have just seen. You pass a window where light flickers from within. A fire burns its glow, visible through the small opening. Shadows move across the interior, suggesting continued activity, continued presence. You slow for a moment, then continue. The bells sound again, their tones carrying through the air with familiar steadiness. You notice how they intersect with this more relaxed rhythm, not interrupting it, but marking it, reminding you that even moments of rest exist within a larger structure. An unusual note from some accounts is that seasonal celebrations and communal feasts could transform these everyday gatherings into larger, more elaborate events, though what you see now is simpler, more routine. You take a slow breath. The warmth of the space you left lingers slightly, carried with you as a memory rather than a sensation. You walk on the street, guiding you forward once more, the city continuing to reveal itself in layers that feel both distinct and connected. You leave the warmth of voices behind, and the street carries you toward the outer edge of the city once more. The space widens gradually, and with it comes a subtle change in tone. The sounds soften not because the city sleeps, but because fewer people gather here at this hour. The walls rise again ahead of you. You recognize them now, not as something distant and unknown, but as a familiar boundary. Their stone surface catches the light of the late afternoon, revealing textures you did not notice before. Small cracks, variations in colour, marks left by time and weather. You approach slowly. A commonly accepted historical observation is that city walls served not only as defence, but as a way to control movement, marking where the city began and ended. As you draw closer, you begin to see how that control continues even now. A guard walks along the top. His steps are steady, his pace unhurried. He pauses at intervals, looking outward, then inward, as if balancing two different responsibilities. His presence does not feel threatening, but it is unmistakably watchful. You stand near the base of the wall looking up. The height feels more significant now than it did in the early morning. Perhaps it is the angle of the light, or perhaps it is your growing awareness of what the wall represents. A gate stands nearby. The same one you passed through earlier, though it feels different now. The light has shifted, casting longer shadows across the ground. The movement around it is more structured, more deliberate. A small group gathers just outside. They speak quietly, their attention directed toward the gate. One steps forward, exchanges a few words with the guard below, then moves through. The process is simple, but it carries a sense of order, of expectation. An insightful point often noted by historians is that gates were closed at certain times, regulating who could enter or leave the city after dark. As you watch, you begin to sense that the day is moving toward that transition. You remain where you are observing. A cart approaches from the outside, its wheels rolling more slowly as it nears the entrance. The driver calls out, his voice clear but not raised. A response comes from within the gate, brief and direct. The exchange is routine, practiced. The cart is allowed through. You notice how each movement here feels intentional, shaped by rules that are understood without needing to be spoken aloud. A lesser known detail is that watchmen often patrolled not only the walls, but the streets at night, enforcing curfews and maintaining order. As you look around, you begin to imagine how this space will change once darkness settles. The openness will narrow, the movement will slow, the city will draw inward. You take a slow breath. The air feels cooler now, touched by the approaching evening. The light softens, losing some of its brightness, becoming more diffuse. A bell sounds, different from the others, lower, more deliberate. It carries a sense of closure, of marking not just time, but transition. You watch as people begin to adjust. Some quicken their pace slightly, their steps more purposeful. Others continue as before, but with an awareness that was not present earlier. A figure passes you carrying a small bundle. Their grip is firm, their attention forward. They do not linger, do not pause. The direction of their movement suggests they are heading toward home, toward a place that offers shelter within the walls. Researchers have explored how the approach of night influenced behaviour in medieval cities, encouraging people to complete tasks and return to familiar spaces. As you stand here, you can feel that shift beginning. The guard above moves again, continuing his path along the wall. His silhouette stands out briefly against the sky, then blends again into the stone. You turn slightly, looking back toward the city. The streets you walked earlier are no longer visible, but you can sense them. Their rhythms continuing even as the day changes. The market, the workshops, the homes all adjusting in their own ways. The bells sound again. They overlap gently, creating a pattern that feels more pronounced in the quieter air. You listen, not with urgency, but with awareness. An unusual observation recorded in some accounts is that night in medieval cities could feel both peaceful and uncertain, the reduction in activity bringing a different kind of attention to the spaces that remained. As you stand here, that dual feeling begins to take shape. You are not afraid, but you are aware. The city is shifting. You step away from the wall, turning back toward the streets. The light continues to fade slowly, almost imperceptibly. The sounds soften, the movement changes, and as you begin to walk again, you carry with you the sense that the day is not ending, but transforming, moving into a quieter, more watchful state. You turn from the wall and follow a street that slopes gently downward, the air cooling slightly as you descend. The sounds of the city shift again, becoming broader, more open, as if the space ahead allows them to travel further without interruption. A faint shimmer of movement appears between the buildings. Water. You continue, and the street opens onto a wider edge where the city meets the river. The surface moves slowly, reflecting the fading light in soft, shifting patterns. It is not still, but it is not hurried either. It carries its own steady rhythm separate from the streets you have walked. The river Ouse. A broadly supported historical understanding is that York's position along the river made it an important centre for trade, connecting it to other towns and regions through waterways. As you stand here, that role feels immediate, grounded in the movement before you. A boat is moored near the bank. Its form is simple, functional, shaped by use rather than decoration. A figure stands aboard, adjusting something near the edge, their movement steady and practiced. A rope stretches from the vessel to a post on the shore, held taut, securing it in place. You step closer. The air carries a different scent here, fresher though still touched by the city. Waterwood and something faintly organic blend together, creating a mixture that feels both grounding and slightly unfamiliar. Another figure approaches from behind you, carrying a bundle. They move directly toward the boat, their steps confident as if they have taken this path many times before. The bundle is passed up with little exchange of words. A nod follows. Then the figure turns and walks back toward the street. The action is brief, efficient. A notable point, often discussed by historians, is that goods moved along rivers in a continuous flow, linking cities like York to wider networks of trade. As you watch this quiet exchange, you begin to understand how that flow operates, not as a single event, but as a series of small repeated actions. A second boat drifts slightly further along the bank. Its movement is subtle, guided by the current rather than active rowing. A figure sits within it, their posture relaxed but attentive, as if waiting for a moment to act. You listen. The sound of water is constant, though gentle. It laps against the edge, touches the wood, then pulls away again. The repetition is calming, steady, almost meditative. You take a slow breath. The air feels wider here, less confined by buildings, though the city remains close behind you. You can still hear its presence, faint but steady, layered beneath the softer sounds of the river. A lesser known detail is that rivers like the Ouse could both support and challenge a city, providing transport, while also posing risks of flooding. As you stand here, the surface appears calm, but you can imagine how it might change, how its quiet movement could become something more forceful. You move along the bank. The ground is firmer here, packed by repeated use, though not as worn as the central streets. Footprints overlap in subtle ways, marking paths that come and go without leaving permanent traces. A small group stands further ahead. They speak quietly, their attention divided between each other and the river. One gestures toward the water, tracing a line that suggests direction, distance, perhaps a journey. You do not interrupt. You simply observe, then continue. Scholars have long examined how trade routes shaped not only economies, but cultural exchange, bringing new ideas and goods into cities through channels like this. As you walk, you begin to sense that connection, the way this river links York to places you cannot see. A bird crosses overhead. Its movement is quick, its call brief. It passes from one side of the river to the other, then disappears beyond the buildings. The moment is small, but it adds to the sense of openness of space that extends beyond the immediate. You pause near the edge. The water reflects the changing light, now softer, more muted as the day continues to fade. The colours shift gently, blending into one another in a way that feels almost continuous. An unusual note recorded in some accounts is that goods transported by river often included everyday items, as well as more valuable cargo, making these waterways essential to both ordinary life and larger economic systems. As you watch the quiet movement before you, that importance feels grounded in the simple exchange you witnessed earlier. You take another breath. The city behind you continues its transition into evening, its sounds softening, its pace adjusting. Here, the river maintains its own rhythm, steady and unchanged by the shift. You turn slowly, looking back toward the streets. The buildings rise again, their forms familiar, now their presence steady. The path you have taken feels connected to this place, as if everything you have seen leads naturally to this edge, where movement continues beyond the city. The bells sound again, faint carried across the water, their tones softened by distance. You listen. They feel different here, less immediate, more like a reminder than a directive. You step away from the river, returning to the street. The air narrows again, the sounds shift. The city reclaims your attention, and as you walk forward, you carry with you the quiet continuity of the water, the sense of connection that extends beyond the walls and into the wider world. You leave the river behind, and as you walk back into the streets, the light has softened further, settling into that quiet space between day and night. The edges of buildings blur slightly, their sharp lines easing into shadow. The city does not stop, but it changes its tone as if lowering its voice. Your footsteps sound different now. Not louder, but more noticeable as the surrounding noise has begun to thin. Conversations are shorter, movements more contained. The energy of the day has not disappeared, but it has folded inward, becoming something steadier and more reflective. You follow a familiar path without fully realizing it. The streets seem less complex now, as if your earlier wandering has settled into a kind of understanding. Turns that once felt uncertain now feel expected. Spaces that were new now carry a sense of recognition. A broadly supported historical perspective suggests that medieval cities were in a constant state of change, shaped by cycles of growth, hardship and renewal rather than steady progress. As you walk, you begin to sense that layering the way time leaves its mark without fully replacing what came before. A building to your left shows signs of repair. The timber is newer in one section, lighter in colour, standing out against the darker older beams. The plaster between them is smoother, less worn. It suggests something recent, a response to damage or decay that has not yet blended into the whole. You slow for a moment, noticing the contrast. It is subtle, but it speaks of continuity of a structure that adapts rather than disappears. You move on. A doorway stands partially open, and inside, you glimpse a room that feels quieter than those you saw earlier. The fire burns lower, its glow softer, casting longer shadows across the floor. A figure sits nearby, their posture relaxed, their movements slower, as if the demands of the day have eased. You do not linger. The moment feels complete on its own. A lesser known observation from historical studies is that urban life required constant maintenance, from repairing buildings to managing resources, creating a rhythm of care that extended beyond daily routines. As you walk, you begin to notice these small signs of upkeep everywhere. A patch of ground that has been recently levelled, a section of wall reinforced, a tool left near a doorway ready for use again. You continue along the street. The sounds are quieter now, but not absent. A voice calls out briefly, then fades. A door closes with a soft final sound. Footsteps pass you, fewer than before, but still present. You pass through a space that feels familiar. The market. It is different now. The stalls remain, but many are empty or partially cleared. The surfaces that once held goods now rest bare or covered. A few figures remain gathering items, preparing to leave, their movements slower, more deliberate. The air feels lighter here, less crowded with scent, though traces remain, faint reminders of what filled the space earlier. Researchers continue to examine how daily cycles shaped urban environments, with spaces transforming throughout the day to serve different purposes. As you stand here, that transformation feels clear, the same place carrying a different meaning depending on the hour. You move on. The bells sound again. Their tones feel deeper now, more resonant in the quieter air. They mark the passage of time, but also something else. A closing. A settling. You listen as the sound fades. An unusual note from some accounts is that evening in medieval towns often brought a sense of both relief and caution, as the end of work gave way to a more uncertain period. As you walk, you begin to feel that balance. The city is calmer, but not entirely at ease. You pass a group gathered near a doorway. Their conversation is low, their posture relaxed, yet there is a slight awareness in the way they glance toward the street, as if keeping track of movement even as they speak. You continue. The light continues to fade, the sky shifting toward deeper tones. The outlines of buildings become softer, their details less distinct. The city feels both familiar and slightly altered, as if it has entered a different version of itself. You take a slow breath. The air is cooler now, carrying less of the warmth that filled it earlier. The smells are subtler, less defined, blending into something more neutral. You recognise the path ahead. It leads back towards the gate, toward the edge where you first entered. The movement feels natural, not forced, as if the city itself is guiding you gently back. You walk on. The sounds continue to soften the spaces, to empty the rhythm, to slow. And as you move forward, you carry with you the sense of a day completed not in a single moment, but in a gradual unfolding that now draws quietly toward rest. You follow the familiar path toward the gate once more, though everything feels gentler now, softened by the deepening night. The outlines of the city blur slightly, not disappearing, but easing into shadow in a way that makes each step feel quieter, more contained. The air has cooled. It rests lightly against your skin, carrying only faint traces of the scents that filled the day. Smoke lingers, but it is softer now. The sharper edges have faded, leaving behind something calm, almost neutral. You walk slowly. There is no need to hurry. The street that once guided you forward with curiosity now leads you with familiarity. Each turn feels expected. Each space carries a memory of how it was earlier, though now it exists in a quieter form. A firmly grounded historical understanding is that medieval cities marked the end of the day with curfews, often signalled by bells that indicated when fires should be covered and movement reduced. As you continue, you begin to sense that transition fully taking hold. A bell sounds, low, measured. It carries through the air with a clarity that feels different from the earlier tones. This is not a call to gather or begin. It is a signal to settle, to draw inward. You pause for a moment listening. The sound lingers, then fades. The street responds. Movement slows further. A door closes nearby, the sound final but not abrupt. A figure passes you, their steps quiet, their attention directed ahead, as if guided by an understanding that requires no explanation. You continue walking. The buildings around you feel more distant now, not because they have moved, but because the light no longer defines their edges as clearly. Windows glow faintly, in places small pockets of warmth held within the darker forms. You pass one and glance briefly inside. A fire burns low. A figure sits beside it, their posture relaxed, their movements minimal. The scene is calm, contained a quiet reflection of the day that has passed. You move on. A lesser known detail is that night watchmen would often call out the hours, their voices, carrying through the streets to reassure residents and mark the passage of time. As you walk, you listen for such a sound, though it does not come immediately. Instead, you hear your own footsteps. Soft, steady, you approach the gate. It stands as it did before, though. Now it feels different. The openness of morning has given way to something more controlled. The space is narrower, the movement more deliberate. A guard stands nearby. His posture is steady, his presence calm. He watches as you approach, not with suspicion, but with awareness. You nod slightly, and he returns the gesture a quiet acknowledgement that feels complete in its simplicity. You pass through. The transition is subtle yet noticeable. Inside the gate, the city held you. Outside, the space opens. The air feels wider, the sky more visible, though still darkening. The path ahead stretches into shadow, guided only by the faint light that remains. You stop just beyond the wall, not because you must, but because the moment invites it. You turn slightly, looking back. The city rises behind you, its outlines softened by night. The towers, the rooftops, the walls all present, yet less defined. The sounds that carried so clearly before are now distant, their edges blurred. A final bell sounds, faint, carried outward. You listen as it fades into the night. An intriguing observation made by historians is that despite the challenges of medieval life, the rhythms of day and night provided a structure that offered both activity and rest, shaping how people experience time. As you stand here, that structure feels complete, the day having unfolded fully and now settled into stillness. You take a slow breath. The air is calm, the ground beneath you steady, the city behind you quiet yet alive in a softer way. Your steps slow even further. There is nothing left to reach, nothing left to see, only the gentle continuation of time moving forward without urgency. The path ahead remains open, though you no longer feel the need to follow it. Instead, you let yourself rest in the moment. The memory of the streets, the bells, the voices, the quiet spaces all settle into something cohesive, something that no longer needs to be understood, only felt. You close your eyes for a moment. The sounds fade, the air softens, and the city, with all its movement and stillness, becomes something distant and calm. You take one final breath, slow, even, and let it go. The night holds you gently now, without expectation, without demand. Everything you have walked through remains, but it no longer calls for your attention. It simply exists, quiet, steady, at rest. Now the pace softens even more. You imagine the last glow of hearth fires dimming behind shuttered windows, their warmth held close within the homes you passed. The streets grow still, not empty but settled, as if each stone has found its place for the night. The bells, once clear and guiding, now linger only as a memory, their echoes dissolving into the calm air. Your breathing slows. The rhythm of your steps fades into something softer, until even that disappears. There is no need to move anymore. The city rests, and you rest with it. The walls stand quietly, no longer something to approach or leave, but simply part of the landscape that holds everything together. The river continues its slow movement beyond your sight, steady and unchanged, carrying the world forward without asking anything in return. You feel the quiet settle around you, gentle and complete. No voices call, no footsteps follow. Only the soft presence of night wrapping the city in a calm that feels endless. You let your thoughts drift, just as the river drifts, just as the air moves softly through the streets. Nothing needs to be held onto. Nothing needs to be remembered in detail. Only the feeling remains. Warm, steady, safe. And as the last traces of the day fade completely, you allow yourself to sink into that stillness, carried by the quiet rhythm of a city that has finally come to rest. Sweet dreams.